Hello and welcome back to the Crime Reel. For today's true crime narration, we are taking a look at the case of the Chen family and a multiple murder that not only went unsolved for several years, but it was completely unknown that a crime had even occurred. The Chen family was made up of Wu Hung and his wife Ye Mei Chen, along with their two sons Raymond and Edward. Wu Hung owned a successful heating and ventilation company in Taipei City, Taiwan, that funded the family's move to Fairfax County, Virginia, in the United States. The couple wanted to move in order to give their two sons what they believed would be a better education. The Chens lived in a wealthy neighborhood in Great Falls, Virginia, in a huge mansion surrounded by a well-kept garden. Wu Hung and Ye Mei were able to spend a lot of time in Taiwan visiting friends and family, whilst the boys stayed at their home in the US to attend school. They eventually graduated from Herndon High School, whereupon Raymond became a real estate agent and manager for the family's 5 properties in the area, while Edward attended the University of Virginia. It was shortly after enrolling at the university that Edward began dating a woman by the name of Mandy Colby. The couple had known each other from attending the same high school, but their relationship had created a lot of problems within the Chen family. 53-year-old Wu Hung and 52-year-old Ye Mei were very traditional people, and they did not approve of Edward's relationship with Mandy Colby. Edward tried to smooth things over with his family, even going so far as to buy a separate home so he could live with Mandy without his parents finding out. However, Wu Hung and Ye Mei could not be fooled, and they sent Edward back to Taiwan, where he spent some time in a psychiatric facility. But with those actions, it still wasn't enough to end the relationship. Shortly after he returned from Taiwan, 19-year-old Edward and 17-year-old Mandy discovered that they were expecting their first child. Edward knew that this would only make the situation worse between him and the rest of his family. However, he moved in with Mandy and tried to reassure her that things would work out, despite knowing that his family would never accept her or the daughter that they would go on to have together. In August 1995, Edward came up with a solution to end the family conflict once and for all. He went back to the family mansion and shot dead his mother, father, and brother. Afterwards, he did not rush to cover up his crimes, but instead went to Mandy to tell her that everything was now fine and that she didn't need to worry about his parents anymore. To prove this to her, he brought Mandy to the house to show her his family's bodies. She left the home in a state of shock, but didn't call the police because even though she still loved Edward, she was now also afraid of him. Edward remained at the family home to clean up. He buried his family under the floorboards and cleaned the house. Then he made sure to maintain the garden and the exterior of the house so that no one would suspect anything had happened to the family and ensure that no one had any reason to enter the property. He told the neighbours that his family were visiting Taiwan, and as they had a long history of doing this, their absence didn't arouse any suspicions in the neighbourhood. In order to cover his tracks, Edward then told his relatives in Taiwan that his family had died in a car accident in the United States. Edward then managed to assume the identity of his 25-year-old brother, Raymond. Raymond had power of attorney over their parents' estate, which enabled Edward to keep paying the family bills and even allowed him to sell several of their properties using Raymond's name. He and Mandy married and she gave birth to their daughter. Years would pass by and still no one had realised that anything had happened to the Chen family. In 1999, 4 years after the murders, a pipe burst in the house and Edward had to pull up the floors. He was then faced with the problem of trying to figure out what to do with the severely decomposed bodies of his mother, father, and brother. He asked a friend, Michael Reese, how he would go about doing just that, and Michael told him he thought that Edward should cut them up into pieces and toss them into the Chesapeake Bay. Edward offered Michael $100,000 and a new car to help him do it, and Michael agreed. They chopped the bodies into pieces and poured concrete on them before gathering them all in duffel bags and tossing them into the bay. Edward then sold the house and continued to get away with his crimes, but the murders were taking a toll on him mentally. He became very short-tempered and irritable, and his marriage to Mandy suffered. They divorced, and Edward, along with his daughter, moved out of the family home. He found solace in a new woman named Vicky Taylor. Vicky was working as an exotic dancer, and the two began a romance that led them to becoming engaged 14 months after their first meeting. But Vicky soon began to notice that a few things were off about Edward. He had told her that the family had died in a tragic accident in Taiwan years before, so Vicky couldn't understand why they kept getting calls to the home phone for Edward's brother Raymond. Vicky and Edward began to argue a lot, and Vicky ended their relationship. Edward left some of his belongings at Vicky's house, and it was at this point she realised that something was seriously amiss with the story that Edward had been telling her. She found Wu Hung, Ye Mei and Raymond's passports and noted that the last stamp in their passports was actually from the US border, meaning that they had never left the United States. She decided to call the police. However, the police didn't take her call very seriously at first, thinking that she was a jilted ex-girlfriend hell-bent on revenge. But when Vicky put the authorities in contact with Mandy, this would all change. Mandy confirmed Vicky's story and even went on to tell the police that she had seen the bodies all those years ago. The police were then certain that Edward had killed his family, but they had no way to prove it and had very few ways of finding out more information. They had no bodies, no proof that a crime had actually been committed, and the family home had already been sold to new owners. They reached out to Michael Reese, who admitted to them that he had helped Edward get rid of the bodies in Chesapeake Bay. The police organised searches of the water while waiting for a warrant to search the home. However, the search of the bay came back with nothing. Eventually, a warrant was issued for the home where the Chens had previously lived. Bloodstains were discovered under the floorboards, and Edward was asked to hand in a sample for DNA comparison. The police were able to get a match on the blood and were now in a position to bring Edward in for questioning, but they still didn't have enough to charge him with, only really having the testimonies of the other 3 witnesses. However, Edward quickly confessed to everything. He told the police that he had bought a gun from a local superstore and went home to shoot his family. He shot his brother in the chest and then went to his parents' bedroom where he killed both his father and his mother. The police said that Edward was very calm and matter-of-fact throughout his entire interview and never once showed any regret or very much emotion, simply stating the facts as they were and not trying to hide the fact that he had killed his family. However, during his confession, Edward was recorded saying that he did not want to talk to the police and he did not want to talk without his lawyer, but the police continued to ask him questions anyway. Edward's defense lawyer was later able to argue in court that Edward's confession had been coerced. The judge ruled that it was inadmissible in court and Edward's confession was removed from evidence. 27-year-old Edward pleaded guilty anyway. He knew that the police still had the 3 other testimonies and the blood evidence, and he wanted to avoid a trial. At a court in Fairfax County, Virginia, he was found guilty of 3 counts of first-degree murder and was subsequently sentenced to 36 years in prison. He said in the court, "I want to apologise to my family and friends, especially my daughter, for what I put them through. I hope that by not going to trial, I saved everyone more pain and suffering. I feel guilty for what I did." Edward will very likely serve about 30 years of his sentence, and even though the state of Virginia doesn't have parole, he will be able to apply for geriatric release when he reaches the age of 60. Mandy Colby was not charged with any crime, and Michael Reese was not charged for helping Edward dispose of the bodies due to the statute of limitations having expired. That concludes today's case about the Chen family. I would like to thank Kirsten DLCO for suggesting that I cover today's story. Thank you, Kirsten. Thanks very much for listening to the Crime Reel. Stay safe. Goodbye. Psst. The Fairfax County Courthouse is very well known for being involved with the recent US court case between Amber Heard and Johnny Depp. Goodbye.